Welcome to everybody today. Today we are talking about working internationally, the considerations and the first steps. We know that our biggest part of our audience is here in the US, but we also know that people like to move around and there are always opportunities in different places. And what does it take to work internationally? Now, obviously with this latest iteration of COVID, there might be some delays, but at least the information is going to be available to you if you are interested in working internationally for a helicopter operator. I'd like to begin, share my screen. Should have done that just a second ago. There we go. I'd like to begin with our presentation of our speakers today. We are not certain if Louisa Patterson will be joining us. Hopefully she will be able to join us a little later in the call. We do understand that operational commitments, it's part of our industry. We get it. We are grateful if she'll be able to join us. We have Chris Cornwell, who's the Technical Director at Ultimate Heli in Midland, South Africa. And we do have Francisco Diaz, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Ecocopter in Santiago, Chile. Both Francisco and Chris, their companies operate in more than just one location, despite where their headquarters are. Want to make this very clear right up front. This is career advice only. There is no guarantee that by watching this webinar and following what these gentlemen will tell you, that nothing guarantees you a job. We just want to give you information that you can use to help get your resume to the top of the stack, to make sure that you, if you do want to work internationally, or if you're already working internationally in these countries, that you will be able to, again, get your resume to the top of the stack to make sure that you have what you need for success. So again, no guarantees. I'll mention this again a little later on as well. Our webinars are interactive. We do encourage you to ask questions, especially on something like this today, because I can guarantee you I'm not going to cover everything. We do try to cover the questions at the end of the webinar. For you to submit a question, we ask that you use the question module that's part of Zoom. Just click on that, type your question in, and we will do our best to get to the question at the end of the webinar. I expect we'll have a little bit of extra time today. This webinar is being recorded. If you do miss something or if you want to share it, we will be sending a link around. I suspect it will be sometime tomorrow when we get that out. Sometimes it can be as late as next week, but it depends on how fast things get out and about. So I do now invite Chris Cornwell to join me, please. Bring up your camera.
Good evening, Dan.
Good evening, Chris. Apologize. I know it's getting quite late there in South Africa, but we appreciate the fact that you're joining us today. How are you this evening?
No, doing well, thanks. Doing well.
Great. Okay, well, Chris, let's just start out. What does Ultimate Heli do, and where are you working these days?
All right, so Ultimate Heli was a company that started in 2010. We worked as a local charter company, and then we got a contract up in Northern Africa for a mine. We operated 2 twin squirrels there. And then in 2012, we decided to expand the company a bit and do our own MRO. And then 2014, we were awarded with a contract to fly down in Antarctica for the Indian government. On top of that, we were doing a lot of African work, election campaigning, sling operations. The Antarctica contract extended again for this African government, 2017. Which we had 2 412s also flying down in the south, and then also just expanding again into humanitarian work up in Africa, and now also just a few more African countries with the 412s, and then local charters we have. Ultimate Heli is a part of an aviation group. We've got Ultimate Air, Heli, Technical. We've got our heliport, our facility in Midrand, Johannesburg as well. So yeah, as mentioned, we operate on 2 continents. We do 3 voyages a year with the Bell 412s. Every end of the year, we have 3 helicopters down south in Antarctica, 2 different expeditions, and then obviously just the operations up in Africa.
That's pretty extensive. So how many operational bases do you have, or how many maintenance facilities do you have in something like when you're working in so many different locations?
So if I start down south, So we have the vessel which the helicopters are based on. That's one of our line stations for our maintenance and obviously operations. Then we've got a base down in Cape Town where we prep the helicopters, where the helicopters are based when they're not sailing. We've got our main base up in Johannesburg, obviously at the Ultimate Heliport. We've got a base in Uganda for all our African operations. We've got a line station in South Sudan. We've expanded now up into Kinshasa as well, Mozambique. We also had a base in Mali, which is a bit dormant now. So yeah, we've got a good African footprint, to be honest with you.
Okay, now working in 2 different continents and working in so many different countries there in Africa alone, what are the licensing requirements? Is it kind of like the European Union, where one license will work across multiple borders, or does each country have different requirements?
So with our aircraft, they are South African registered. So piloting and engineering licenses are pretty much standard. As long as we have the South African Civil Aviation approval, and then that's also the country doesn't really change the requirements as we're working on South African registered aircraft. So that stays pretty much the same.
Okay. Well, what kind of roles do you have for pilots and for aviation maintenance personnel?
So obviously on the pilot side, there's multi roles. We've got guys from election campaigning, slinging. On the engineering side, we've got normal, from avionics. We've got mechanical engineers. We've got crewmen. We've got the technicians. So yeah, a very diverse group. We've got team leaders that act as on the different voyages as well. So yeah, the pilots, they're multi-role, I must say. The different environments also contribute. There's obviously crew resource management, and there's a few human factors that go with it, with the environmental challenges. So yeah, base managers, some of the engineers are lead engineers, and some of the pilots take up the role as a base manager as well. So yeah.
Okay. Normally I'd ask a question like, what are the general working conditions? But I would expect that your conditions change wherever you might be. So maybe you could pick 2 or 3 places. Maybe your headquarters there in Midrand, and then one of the countries in Africa, and then perhaps what it's like to work in Antarctica as well.
All right, so let me start with our main base at the heliport. Yeah, pretty much the African weather. A little bit cold, gets hot, windy. Normal South African temperatures, so no real challenges there, to be honest. If I go down south to Antarctica, very challenging. We've got minus 30, 40 degrees Celsius. We've got strong winds. Sometimes you end up based on the ship, you can't fly for 3-4 days at a time. The wind is the weather is just incredible. It's you have to experience it to believe it, to be honest. And then if I go up north, I've got the opposite. We 40, 50 degree heat. We are in South Sudan. We have no hangar. It's only a line station. So the guys are out in the heat of the day doing line maintenance, pre-flights, post-flights. It's tough. It takes a toll on the crew for sure, especially the engineers. And they at it all day.
Okay, well, let's start with the engineers. When somebody would like to come to work for Ultimate Heli or Ultimate Aviation, what kind of qualifications are you looking for? Are you looking for previous experience? Are you willing to take people right out of school or out of the military, perhaps? What brings somebody to the top of your resume list?
So I'll be honest with you, Dan. It actually varies. Obviously you want guys licensed on type, but we've also experienced guys coming from a military background, having very good experience, but not having the license. And we're willing to put them through the course, and go and do, for argument's sake, an Airbus or a Bell approved maintenance course. Just from an experience point of view, it's the Air Force. I think the military background, it gives you a very different insight, experience, field maintenance, thinking out the box. You don't always have the spares, and keeping aircraft flying, but keeping them safe at the same time. So yeah, different types, experience, and then licenses as well. We've come across a lot of people, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, that in the industry, many people have the paperwork, but they don't have the knowledge. So you've got to adapt that person and put him maybe in a team where he can gain experience as well, because as you know, the different continents we're operating on, it's different environments. It's a different mindset as well, different way of maintaining the aircraft. preserving them, corrosion control, obviously down south, more than up north. So yeah, you got to kind of play the right player for the right game, if I can put it like that. So yeah, it's not always easy.
It sounds like there's a lot of variables in there, so I appreciate that. What
No,
about the
for sure.
pilots?
So pilots pretty much the same. With oil and gas, I think with the oil price that dropped, we had a lot of overflow of pilots, if I can say that. And now with the price picking up, a lot of guys are moving back into the oil and gas field. But pilots, yeah, we go from normal, like I said, election campaigning, which, it sounds pretty simple, but go and land in the middle of a soccer field in Africa with thousands of people running towards a helicopter, and you're a single pilot operation. It's kind of tough, and then you've got the slinging, which we do down south or up in Africa as well. And then, yeah, just multi-crew environment. Some pilots are used to flying single crew, and having them adapt to that. Obviously the shift co-pilot to captain. Yeah, I must say we invest a lot in our crew, so we don't mind taking junior guys and building them up and having a plan for them to fit them in and let them gain an experience on a contract. And then end of the day, they're either the PIC or they're the base manager as well.
Do you normally hire from within or promote from within, or do you ever hire externally for, say, advanced roles?
So yeah, it's a bit of a juggle. We prefer to kind of invest in our own people, if I can say that. So we get junior pilots, and the amount of hours we fly, they build hours very quickly, and then we get the PICs, to give them to swap seats, give them some PIC time. We get our chief pilots to do checks on them, and then we try and invest in our own guys so we can promote them. But sometimes it calls for you need experience from outside. Maybe it's a new contract, new environment, and you just need the expertise, just to feed off onto the younger guys or to the guys in the team already.
Do you ever bring in, or do you ever accept applications or hire people internationally?
100%. We get CVs or resumes of pilots and engineers internationally every day, and like more than one. So yeah, I think the kind of operation we do is very intriguing, and people want to experience it. Some people love Antarctica, and some people just want it on a bucket list. And I've been there, done that, and looks good on the CV. But no, it definitely.
Indeed. Okay. Well, what bit of advice would you give to somebody who, either engineer or pilot, who wants to come to work for Ultimate Heli? What bit of advice should they? What kind of training? What kind of mindset? What kind of personality? What are you looking for that would help get somebody to the top of the stack of resumes?
Look, I must say, there's a saying that says Africa isn't for sissies, but yeah, it's a very different environment. Like I said, the Central African countries, the heat, it's extreme. It takes its toll. So psychologically, you've got to be strong. Obviously, expertise. We need guys to think off their feet. We need guys that can also, when you're in a team, for argument's sake, I'm just the guys that go on the ship. They're a team of 10. And you got to keep the guys together. Not everybody has a good day. So when the guys are having a bit of a bad day, you got to have someone there just to boost them a bit. And he's got to be a team player for sure. Both environments are tough. So strong mindset, character, very good, positive. Obviously, you don't want someone that's going to be breaking down the team. But yeah, the experience is key. Obviously, background. Obviously, where do you come from? And where do you want to go? Is it just a short-term stint, or are you willing to build with a company, add value? So, there's a few aspects.
Okay, Chris, well, I appreciate your time. We'll come back to you in just a few minutes when we get through with the other panelists, and then we will have you join us back for the question and answer session.
100%. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Chris. Louisa, thank you for joining us. Gosh, appreciate that you were able to join us today. We are grateful that you were able to make it. How are you this afternoon? Or this morning, I guess, in New Zealand now. Louisa, you're muted. There should be a microphone down in the corner of the, there we go. I see you're live now.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Hi, sorry, I'm not in my office. Yeah.
Okay, well, again, I'm grateful for joining. I know that there's a couple different things that Over the Top does there in Queenstown. Can you tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. So I could probably speak about the pre-COVID times because, as you may be aware, our country has been in lockdown with the borders closed. I think we're on day 622 now with no tourists. So our company is predominantly a tourism company based in Queenstown, Fiordland, New Zealand, flying overseas tourists into the Fiordland National Park, which is glaciers and mountains and alpine lakes, and then down onto wild west coast beaches. And so we're 90% tourism, and predominantly busy from November's through to April, and then in about then we have a sort of a shoulder season, and then we go into the heli skiing in the mountains in July, August, and September, and then back into tourism again in the sort of November phase.
I have had the opportunity to visit your region. I am still admiring it in my memory. It was an absolutely gorgeous place. I can certainly understand why so many movies and shows are filmed in that area. So I'm jealous of the tourists that get to fly with you. What kind of roles do you have for pilots and aviation maintenance personnel, engineers in New Zealand, in your company?
And once again, I'm going to have to speak pre-COVID because right at the moment we're
Certainly
in a hiatus. We've just been keeping everybody on in full-time roles with very little to do. So let's put that aside and presume we're back in pre-COVID or post-COVID.
We will get there eventually.
Yeah, thank you. I hope so. So the roles of ours, we have pilots, obviously, that need to be well versed in mountain flying. So we expect our pilots to be qualified in mountain flying and have a knowledge of the area first off, but then we call them ambassadors of New Zealand. So whereas they might be away for 5 hours with some clients, they might only be in the air for about an hour and a half. So the rest of the time they'll be hiking across a glacier, ice on the glacier with them, or they'll be dining them at an alpine lake, sort of perched at 4,500 feet in the fjords. So it's all about being an ambassador of New Zealand. And we say we're not so much a helicopter line as an entertainment company. So the pilots need to have that ability to want to be able to interact with the clients on that type of work. Obviously in New Zealand, we have other companies down here that do more traditional helicopter work, which will be like agricultural spraying and fertilizing, fire bucket work, lifting work. But where I'm based in Queenstown, there's very little call for that because we're basically in a tourist hub. It's like the Hawaii of New Zealand, I suppose.
Well, that makes perfect sense. What about for maintenance personnel, your engineers? Are they based out of your hangar facility, or do they ever do any remote operations?
We use a local company, Part 145 local company, and they're actually originally Canadian, and they've set up this fabulous helicopter support company. And so they do all of the routine, they provide all the maintenance, and they're relatively busy still because they're servicing helicopters that aren't predominantly tourism. And yeah, so they are basically, they have a lot of international maintenance guys there, and you probably see them a lot at the HAI and those sorts of things in the past.
Okay. What kind of licenses are required? And I'll have to ask this to Chris during the question and answer session. And what kind of, is there an equivalency where if somebody comes in from the United States and they have an FAA license, what do they need to do to convert that to a New Zealand license?
I'm not entirely sure, but I'd imagine that to get from an FAA license to an NZCPL, or even the ATPL to CPL, they would just need to do the local law exam. I'm pretty sure there's a bilateral agreements between them. So it would be New Zealand medical and then the New Zealand law exam for conversion of their licenses. And then some knowledge of the area is the thing. It takes, traditionally, whether a pilot has 1,500 hours or 8,000 hours, when they start with us, traditionally they'll have the same learning patterns, which is it'll take one summer where they'll need to be supervised as to the places that you can go and the conservation areas that we are allowed to land on and into, and the local weather, who to call, the local high country farmers, the private treaty areas that we can land. So the first summer, they really have no idea of all of that and they're learning. And the second summer, they get a little bit more of an idea of it and feel more comfortable. And by the third season, you can rely on them to have the knowledge to be able to run a day on their own. So we categorize them into A, B, and C, loosely based on that. And then it's categorized into regions. So that, like, for example, Dusky and Dartful Sound, which is sort of further south than our predominant Milford fjords and our western routes, they maybe become an A pilot on Milford and Fiordland, but they still may be a C pilot without having done enough trips down into the other areas. So it becomes a ever-ending learning box ticking exercise to become an A category pilot in all of the areas.
I hadn't thought about that. For a region the size you're looking at, that does make perfect sense. You mentioned a second ago something about 1,500 hours. Is that a minimum that you look for when you're hiring a new pilot?
Not necessarily, but probably around that. But it's also other things you weigh against it. Like we have a range of helicopters, so we've got, the H125 Squirrels, and we have the EC-130s. So we like experience on those, some sort of time on them. But we also have the BK-117. So ideally, if somebody has BK time or twin engine time, that sort of takes away that hurdle. So they can get onto that aircraft and be comfortable in the aircraft while they're learning everything about the terrain and the weather. Like if you want to go into Fiordland, and once again, we're talking pre-COVID, but there's 150 days of the year we can't get there because it's inclement weather. And there's only 50 days of the year where it's perfect blue sky. So the rest of the time, you need to know which valleys to take, where you're going to get your clear areas and that sort of thing. So we like our guys to be, and girls to be, familiar on the aircraft so that they can concentrate more on the weather and the elements and looking after the clients.
Okay. What else would a candidate do if they were wanting to come in and work for you? What should they do to try to help improve their chances to hire on with Over the Top?
That's an interesting question, Dan. And over the years, I think I've been operating this company for 40 something years now, but over the years there was I had an Englishman that was desperate to come and fly in New Zealand. He said that he had a picture of a helicopter up at an alpine lake on his bunk wall on a ship when in the in the Afghanistan, in the war against one of the wars that England were involved in. Anyway, he had this picture and he was like, if I survive being a helicopter pilot in this war, then I want to go and work for this company in New Zealand. And we were like, well, it's all well and good. So in the end, he arrived immigrated, and I just gave him a stack of books from our library on all the local Fiordland characters and all the local areas. So if one of our overseas clients wanted a story about Number 8 Wire or some other iconic New Zealand character, he had read about it. So I suppose the answer to the question is some interest in learning about the characteristics of the South Island of New Zealand, its people, the places, the history of the Maori, and to be able to reiterate those to the clients.
Well, that so nicely dovetails with what you were saying about calling your pilots the ambassadors of New Zealand. It makes perfect sense that they would have a working knowledge of your history, of your culture. It just makes them that much better of a tour guide then, I would believe.
Yes, yeah, and it takes a certain type of pilot that wants to do that, because a lot of pilots, want to be collective up and head out the door, and I used to do that sort of flying, and it's a lot of fun, and takes a lot of skill. But this area in Queenstown, as I mentioned before, doesn't really call for a lot of that work. So we've developed this niche in helicopter tourism, and we might land at an alpine lake and shut down, and enjoy the natural quiet, and challenge the clients to swim in the ice amongst the icebergs in the lake, and then so it's all a bit of it becomes an excursion rather than a helicopter flight. The helicopter is just the way to get people to these very unique, pristine locations.
I think you have just given me a reason to come back down to the South Island and visit New Zealand again. Thank you, Louisa. I'll ask you to go ahead and mute your camera and your microphone for just a few minutes. We will come back to you in just a moment for the question and answer session from the attendees. And right now, I'd like to go ahead and ask Francisco to join me from EcoCopter in Santiago, Chile.
Hello, Dan. Good evening.
Francisco, welcome. I can hear you just fine. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are things in Santiago this afternoon?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, well, John, I'm grateful that you're able to join us today. Can you tell me a little bit about your company and what you do there in Chile and in South America?
Okay, EcoCopter is a almost 20 years old company. We have operations in Chile, Ecuador, and Peru by now. In Chile, we have 2 bases, one base for oil and gas operation and an offshore operation with EC-135. In Santiago, we have our main base with helicopters mainly working for mining companies, some heli skiing during winter, and some firefighting during summers. Peru also is a company that operates mainly for mining company and utility work, and Ecuador the same thing, mainly long line working for drilling companies in the mining sector.
Okay, so what kind of roles do you have for pilots that want to fly for EcoCopter?
Well, the roles are for pilots are mainly pilots. Sometimes they perform as base managers also when we have bases, especially for firefighting and the mining operations outside our main base. And we also have some pilots that works as instructors in our training center in Santiago.
Okay, note about for maintenance personnel. I would assume that you probably have a base there in Santiago, and then that perhaps the engineers travel with the aircraft as well.
We have our main maintenance centers. It's effectively in Santiago. We have for helicopters for the 145 and 125. We also have a maintenance centers for Safran engines. but we have also maintenance centers in Peru and in Ecuador and in Magallanes, in our further south. Mainly the mechanics, we have two types of technicals. One stay in the main base to do the main maintenance of the helicopters, and we have the second one, and they do the line maintenance that they fly with the helicopters to the bases or the sites. They work side by side with the pilot, and he also performs as a cargo master to help with the long lining operations.
Okay, what types of licenses are required for both your pilots and maintenance personnel, your engineers? And do you have any roles that do not require licenses?
Mainly all our pilots, they have the commercial license. In South America, you need one license from Ecuador, one from Peru, and one from Chile. It's not a common license for all of us. We can do some kind of convalidations, but you have to have the license. The mechanics also have to have an engineer license. And without license, we have some helpers in the hangar mainly. And in some kind of operations, we also have some helpers in the field.
And do you accept applications from international pilots from elsewhere in South America or from elsewhere around the world?
Yes, actually, we have had some during summers, our high season. We have some pilots from Spain coming for the season, and and pilots from South America, from Peru and Ecuador mainly.
Okay, well, I would imagine, I know Spanish, there's different dialects based on where you are on a particular continent, or if you're coming from Europe or from the United States or Central America. I'm guessing Spanish is probably a required language for you.
Yeah, for sure. It's a must for us and for obtaining the license. You have to have complete knowledge of Spanish.
Okay, well, can you describe the general working conditions that your pilots might work under on just a given day?
Well, mainly our shifts is done 15 days on by 6 days off, depending on the operation. The offshore operation, they have 15 on, 15 off. And let's say about 5% of our operations are in our main base in Santiago. They go to their houses every day. And the other are in bases located normally in mining camps or firefighting camps outside of Santiago.
And then what about for the maintenance personnel?
The maintenance personnel, well, they do the same shifts as the pilot. We call it the line mechanics. And the mechanics in our main base, they work from 8 to 6. And normally they also do some shifts. They work all week long. Depends on the type of maintenance we have in the hangars.
Do you have minimum requirements for pilots or minimum requirements for the engineers?
Well, the engineers, we normally, if we require engineers, we ask them to have already the license. We can provide the in-house courses of the different types of helicopters. Normally, for the engines, we go to the manufacturer. But also we have some helpers in the hangar that they start from the very beginning, very young, and they can, if they perform well, they can opt for a license with the local authority. Study for it and get the license. For pilots, as our main clients are mining companies that request some standards, we need at least 1,500 hours, and especially with the twin engine helicopters, they require twin engine time also.
Okay, do you have any types of training programs or apprenticeship programs where if somebody comes in and they don't have any experience whatsoever? I would assume that this would be more somebody who's from Chile as opposed to an international applicant. But do you have any training programs or apprenticeship programs?
Actually, a couple of years ago, we started hiring not low-time pilots, but pilots coming from the armed forces with zero commercial experience. And we call it junior pilots, and they normally start a program of 1 year or 1 year and a half that they start learning how to do the different jobs we do, have heli skiing, firefighting, working in the high mountain environment, in the mining companies to get experience, and then little by little they can start performing as pilots in commands in that kind of operations. We always also have some easy operations that they can do, but our mainly operation is in in the higher requirement environment.
Okay, and then do you tend to promote from within, or do you ever hire anybody externally for advanced positions?
We didn't have the case to do it, but we're not close to it either. So
Well, that makes sense. I can appreciate your flexibility there. So if somebody really wants to come to work for you, what would they need to do to really help stand out, make their skill set, their training, their education, their experience, their mindset? What do they need to do to really help get their resume to the top of your stack?
yeah, certainly a team player. We're almost like a tribu in Ecocopter, so a team player is a must. Always safety first, and be prepared to move in our country and in the other countries we operate. And so it's a job that you're always moving from one place to another, so it must be flexible. And of course, Spanish is certainly a must to operate in to be working in our operation.
Okay, one more quick question. What is involved in converting, if somebody has an FAA license, what would they need to do to convert their license over to, say, one for Chile? Let's just pick one of your countries for that.
Yeah, well, actually, Chile is the most open sky country, I think, in the world. Everybody, if they have a signed contract with the company, can convalidate their license. They can log all the hours that they have. But they have to give the written exam of the local regulations and do it in Spanish. So you're not allowed to fly in other language especially in utility work.
Okay, well, I think that's actually all the questions that I've got for you, Francisco. Thank you so much. I appreciate your joining us. I'd like to now invite Chris to join me, and then I'd like to also have Luisa come back on, and we will see if we have any questions from our audience here. Okay, there we go. We do only have a couple of questions, so we won't be taking too much time. First one, let's go with, well, I think we've already asked about the FAA license conversions for, actually, no, Chris, I missed that with you. What does it take to convert an FAA license for working in South Africa?
Dan, if I'm not mistaken, I think obviously you'll come with a valid medical and type rating. I think it's just air law that you need to write with the local authority, as far as I'm aware. I think so. I think that's it.
That does sounds pretty easy as well.
Might be an English proficiency test as well, but I'm sure you. Same as Francisco's challenge he has there in Chile. Local language.
Local language is a must.
And Luisa, I think you makes that pretty easy with English in New Zealand, just like South Africa too. So let's see, Luisa, what Choppy says, somebody has asked, what is the average cost of living and housing in New Zealand? And your microphone is muted, so we'll need to have you unmute.
Hello.
There we go.
Gosh, well, Queenstown is quite an expensive place to live. And I think the average houses are about $1 million New Zealand dollars. So what's that, about 700,000 US? And cost of living, I'm not really the one to ask, I'm not sure. It's similar to Australia.
So do you, since your pilots tend to be seasonal there in New Zealand, do they tend to bunk together, or do you offer facilities where they can, share expenses and things like that?
No, most of them have their own homes, and they've worked their way up through the property market on the times that they've been with us. So most of them have families and their own homes. There are opportunities in Queenstown because it has a lot of international workers for what we call for them to flat together with other people. So yeah, so the single pilots may tend to do that, to find themselves some accommodation with with people of a similar age.
Okay. Chris, let's ask you the same question. What is the cost of living like in South Africa and maybe one of your other countries where you operate? What are living conditions like? How do you handle that when you send an aircraft and crew to Sudan?
Well, I wouldn't have to be able to answer for Sudan. We get our crew in a hotel there. I have no idea what it's like in Sudan, to be honest. Antarctica, I doubt the standard of living. It's quite a bit of impossible. So I will just use Johannesburg and maybe compare it to Cape Town if I could.
There we go. That's fine.
I think average house price. Obviously, I mean I've got to convert it to US dollars, I suppose. So what with the exchange rate as it is, maybe 100,000 US dollars. For a normal house, pilot's probably earning, I don't know, maybe between $2,000-3,000 a month. Yeah, the Joburg, Johannesburg, Cape Town has a lifestyle, so people are not so fussed about what they earn. But in Johannesburg, it's the rat race. Everybody wants to just make money and have quite expensive lifestyles, I think. So yeah, I can't really answer it, but those are the values I can use as what Louisa has given us. So I'll just go off her template. Okay, well, Francisco, let's ask you the same question. What I know your facility in Santiago, among others. What is the cost of living like there for a pilot or a mechanic?
Well, Santiago is the most expensive city in the country, but normally between $2,500 and $3,000, $30,000 is okay to have a good living.
Okay, surprisingly, those are all the questions we've had today. I am grateful. We might as well go ahead and wrap things up. We'll let Chris get to bed early. I know that it's quite late there. Let Louisa and Francisco go ahead and get along with your day. All of you, I want to express my deepest appreciation to each of you for joining us, for giving back to the industry and sharing this information. Obviously, right now, COVID is an unusual time. We know that international hiring is going to take a little while to get back to, but I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to share your information with our audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. Louisa, appreciate it. Francisco, appreciate it. And Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Absolutely. Invite you to go ahead and turn your cameras off. I just have a little bit of housekeeping to do to wrap things up, and I will finish things up hopefully fairly quickly here. Let's see here. And of course, the screen is hiding. There we go. Our webinar is coming up next week. This one's a little bit tentative. I think we're running into a holiday period where we're going to end up with some issues trying to get some people confirmed. But right now we are planning to do a mill to sieve maintenance edition for the people who are thinking about transitioning out of the military, who are working in maintenance. What do they need to do to work in the civilian sector? If we do end up having to change the date, it will not be canceling. We'll just simply postpone it until sometime in January. Coming on December 16th, some of you may have watched our aviation photography webinar about a month ago. We believe that there was actually quite a bit more information that we needed to share, so we're going to do part 2. And so if you have any interest in aviation photography, aerial photography, shooting pictures for some of the great magazines that are in our industry, we invite you to come back. That one turned out to be quite popular. We had a lot of questions. We'll probably go a little bit longer on that one. Just because, again, it seems like it's a niche topic of a lot of interest to people. December 23rd, December 30th, we do not have webinars. We hope that you'll enjoy the holiday period at the end of the December, the end of the year with your families, with your coworkers, and we wish you the best. We do have some questionnaire coming for people shortly. We do ask that you take just a minute to let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about in the future webinars, how things went today. If you have any suggestions, I greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have something for HAI in general, we would love to hear about that as well, what we could do better, what we're already doing okay with, what you think might be something of interest to us and the industry. Best way to do that is to use the email address president@rotor.org. Send us your challenges, your comments, your suggestions. We're happy to take it all. Jim sees each of those emails each time, and he does pass those along for sharing. I do want to wrap up by saying one more time, again, this is career advice. There are no guarantees for employment based on this webinar. Our panelists were kind enough to share the information that they did. Just because you watch the webinar does not guarantee employment with these companies or with any company. That does wrap us up for today. We do appreciate your time. We do know that most of you have very, very busy schedules. Until next week, I hope, we ask that you fly safe, that you be safe, and we'll see you again very, very soon.